There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Kari Kwas. I'm with the Snohomish Conservation District. Tonight, we are doing another detention pond class. We started this program with the city of Lake Stevens last year, and we're continuing it because the work continues and needs to get done. So tonight, my featured speaker is David Jackson, Community Conservation Program Manager with Snohomish Conservation District, and I'll be your moderator. I'm Kari Kwas, the Community Engagement Project Manager. Let's see. Whoa, and everything's flying around. It's summer now, everything goes faster. Although the weather's been quite interesting, as you probably have paid attention. A lot of rain, so which means a lot of stormwater, and stormwater comes off of roofs. So that's why we're here talking about detention ponds tonight. So if you have any questions about any of the city work or any of the work with Lake Stevens, please get in touch with me. Tonight, we will be using the chat or the Q&A for questions. Please put them in there and I will pass them along to David. We are recording this and I will send it out afterwards. It'll be on the I Love Lake page as well as the city website. So a little bit about a conservation district. If you've made it this far, you know who we are, but we are a non-regulatory state agency, sort of like a fire district. We're a special district, but tied to conservation. And so we offer free technical assistance. We work with rural and urban residents. We started working with farmers a long time ago when the land was literally blowing away. And that has turned into still working with farmers, but then also looking at the urban environment where there's a lot of concrete. And so we're trying to put in different practices that can also bring back natural resources to good health, soil, water, air, etc. So this is one of our adult education pieces of our work. If you wanted us to come out to your property, we would be happy to do so, to answer questions about what you may want to do. And we also work with the youth, especially in Lake Stevens. So probably since 2014, we've been doing a program called I Love Lake, and it is in partnership with the city of Lake Stevens. And you can go to ilovelake.org or on the website or on Facebook to get involved and figure out what's going on. But we offer all kinds of different things. So just a few of the highlights from this year's season of work, we'll call it. One, the Cascade Award is back. It'll be our 5th time doing this. We recognize lake-friendly gardeners, and that could be someone with forested land, or it could be someone in an urban environment, or maybe they have a food garden that's just outstanding. We come out and look at your property, and then we do the awards later in the summer, and that will be tied to a rain barrel painting event on August 12th. We're also doing this here today, the Detention Pond Awareness. Last month, we did a Lawns to Lettuce webinar, and you can find that on the website. And then also this summer, we'll be taking applications and then doing site visits for a native plant buffer program. And so that is a rebate program up to $250 to get native plants and trees onto your property. So reach out to us for that. And lastly, the Cascade Award will be announced at that rain barrel painting event on August 12th. So stay tuned for that. We did it last year at North Cove Park, and it was so fun to do the rain barrel painting. You buy the barrel, you paint it, and then you take it home. So if you live in an HOA, you may have seen these signs. John, who is also on this call from the city, he's been putting them up on the fences and nearby the different actual detention ponds. And mostly that is to make people aware of what they're looking at. They're usually behind fences because you really don't want people messing in there. David will go into that. But if you see one of these signs, it means you live in a place where you do have a detention pond, and you should be maintaining that along with your neighbors. So on the website, you can find more information, but after today, you'll know more about what you would need to do to maintain that pond. So again, go to ilovelake.org. We'd love to see everybody following along and track with us this summer. So also on the call, but not speaking, is going to, or answering questions later, I should say, is Shannon Farrant. She's the Surface Water Management Coordinator with the City of Lake Stevens. She's my main contact at the city these days. We also have John, and I just put in the sign because really that's what he does most of the time, is putting these up, but he's an engineering technician with the City of Lake Stevens and their surface water department. And then my speaker tonight is my colleague, David. And again, he's the Community Conservation Program Manager. So he's working more with the urban side of the Conservation District and has a lot of stormwater knowledge. So he'll be running through these slides. And at this point, David, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks everyone. And special thanks to Kari for getting us all set up and introduced like that. So tonight we are going to be talking about detention ponds, specifically their care and maintenance within the city of Lake Stevens. We are going to cover this in 3 parts, and I know that seems very intense that this webinar has chapters, but really it's just to kind of break up the subject matter and also to give us a break to answer questions as we go. If we were doing this in person, I would be kind of answering questions on the fly as people raise their hand. It's a little bit harder to do that in a webinar setting. So once we get through a part, which will not be terribly long, we'll pause, see if anybody has any questions, and then move on to the next part. If you think of a question later, go ahead and still slap it in the chat, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. But the 3 things we're going to cover is general overview of the stormwater problem, the basics of detention ponds, and then detention pond maintenance. I really want to encourage everyone to not try to memorize what is in this in this presentation. These slides will be available for you. These resources will be available to you. This recording will be available. So if you have any questions or if you see a slide with a ton of information, I promise I don't want you to memorize or try and absorb everything on that slide. It's really just an example so you know that these things exist, and we will be happy to provide you with that information. So please don't try to memorize anything. So let's talk about stormwater. I always call this section the stormwater problem, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because stormwater is either a problem or a resource. Depends on how you think about it. But because we're talking about the detention pond systems and their maintenance, I tend to view it more as a problem, as sort of what can stormwater do to these systems and why do they require maintenance? So this is a photo of a beautiful deciduous portion of the Pacific Northwest, and you can see very little of what we would call impervious surface. Everything here is designed to absorb or infiltrate or handle water in a very natural way. That is because forest surfaces are what we call pervious, meaning they allow water to pass through. You notice that in this sort of equation, a lot of the water is given up through evapotranspiration. That's what happens when plants photosynthesize. It means that the water is absorbed by plants. You'll notice that another high amount is 35% is on average is infiltrated into the groundwater and the soil, and a very small amount, about 15%, runs off the surface and into waterways. So this is, I think, probably about the opposite of what most of us would think of as a lush green forest. It's the big paved parking lot. And you'll notice that there's not really a way for water to get into the soil from this paved parking lot. This is called impervious surface. You'll notice that in a similar diagram, a very small amount of evapotranspiration, a very small amount is either detained or infiltrated. The vast majority of rainwater that hits on impervious development runs off into a waterway. Now you might be saying, that's not a problem. Water's supposed to go in rivers. Why is that an issue? Well, when rainwater in particular falls from the sky and flows into and is channeled into waterways, that can cause a number of issues. Flooding is a big one. If the groundwater isn't holding that soil, if plants aren't holding that soil, it means that a lot more water is going into those waterways. And if those waterways become full, and by full we mean either overflowing themselves or at least as high as the outfall, meaning the water level is above whatever pipe is putting stormwater into it, you have systems back up, you have flooding. We've had one of the wettest Junes that we've had recently, and part of what has been causing problems is the water has been falling in a large amount very quickly. And we don't always have the best systems to make sure that lots of water can go where it needs to go. Another issue is erosion. Water runs over soil and will take soil with it. and will cause erosion of waterways. It will cause erosions of any other place that isn't stabilized, either through green or gray means. It means that, you know, water, we like to say around the conservation district that water always wins. And if you don't believe us, ask the Grand Canyon. Fast moving water in large quantities can move a lot of soil, and especially in the developed, in our developed areas, when soil starts moving where we don't want it to go, it causes a big problem. Pollution is another issue. When rainwater hits streets and parking lots and even lawns, and it runs off into a catch basin, which you see there in the sort of third photo down, it's not necessarily clean water. It's carrying anything it comes in contact with it. You see a lot of oil, sediment going with it, fecal coliform from, you know, dogs if you don't pick up their, or even if you do pick up their leavings. It brings a lot of things with it. And then finally, it causes an issue because if it's not going into the soil, it's depleting the groundwater. It goes straight over the top of the soil and into rivers and on its way. That becomes a real issue for people who rely on groundwater, primarily through wells, for, you know, water in their homes. Becomes a much bigger issue for things like agriculture. So stormwater is a problem in several contexts. It's not just about it's not just about where it goes, it's about how it gets there. So that's where detention ponds come in. Detention ponds are structures, artificial structures that contain water. They contain stormwater, so they run, water comes from other places, namely through what we call conveyance, catch basins, and it's put into these ponds to either be retained or detained, and eventually handled in a more natural way, which keeps these issues from happening, the flooding, the pollution, the erosion. So a quick overview of detention ponds, and the rest of this thing is going to be talking about detention ponds. So don't worry if you don't feel like after this slide you have a full understanding. We're going to talk about it at length. But some quick facts to give you some context. There are wet and dry detention ponds. They're commonly called detention ponds or retention ponds. However, some ponds have both. They will have what's called a wet cell and a dry cell. We're going to be talking about detention and retention differently and what different levels of maintenance takes, because your pond may have both. They are part of environmental protection. They're not just things that, you know, keep water out of your way. They're also there to make sure that stormwater runoff doesn't impact the environment in severely negative ways. Treatment is part of the function of the detention pond. We're going to talk about that a little later as well. They do require regular maintenance. They have vegetation. They have a number of systems that are involved in their good function. And like any machine or like any installation, maintenance is necessary. And for the most part, they are privately owned. There's a little bit of a myth that, you know, the city owns all the detention ponds. The city often will own some, but for the most part, they are privately owned, and they are built as part of a development, and then that developer transfers ownership to an HOA, a community board, or in some cases, apartment complex management. So I mentioned conveyance, so we're going to start there. We're going to start at the sort of top of the system. On the left there, you have some examples of catch basins in 3 sizes. And then on the right, you can see a catch basin in its natural habitat. I'm certain you have seen some of these in your life. They are ubiquitous everywhere in cities. This is the start of the system. Water flows into these, and then it usually settles there for a small amount of time, and then the water is conveyed through a pipe to a stormwater control facility. The reason that these exist is, one, to sort of create the inlet to the conveyance system, but also to start the treatment process. These have what are called sumps, which is space at the bottom for sediment, and debris and things to sort of settle down into the bottom so that they don't end up in whatever the treatment facility is. These also require cleaning, but we're not going to talk about that too much today. But this is the start of the system. So if you're wondering, well, how does the water even get here? And you're walking around your neighborhood and you see one of these, this is where it all begins. So I mentioned detention versus retention. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of what the difference is. A detention, so you can think about it. You can think about it in terms of high school, as I think none of us really do, but this is my favorite way to approach it. If you get detention in school, what does that mean? It means that, I realize you can't answer, so this is rhetorical, don't worry. Detention means that you are held after for a period of time instead of going home early or going to recess or doing something else. You are held for a relatively short amount of time, and then you're released. That is a detention pond. This is also called a dry cell or a dry pond. Water is not supposed to be here long term. It's supposed to hold water temporarily and discharge it. A retention pond, going back to the school analogy, when they talk about student retention, they mean how do we keep kids in school? How do we keep kids in school long term or until they finish their education? Retention ponds are also called wet ponds or wet cells. They are pretty much always supposed to have water. They are more like small lakes than anything, but they are still designed with capacity so that that water level will rise during a storm event, and after it dries out, will drop again. So that's the difference between detention versus retention. So you can think, is my pond, is the pond I have just keeping kids after school, or is it trying to keep kids in school indefinitely? If that doesn't work for you, I'm not going to feel insulted, but that's the way it works for me. So since we're talking about detention pond primarily, we're going to talk a little bit about detention, sort of what a detention pond is. So almost all detention ponds will have some kind of access ramp. This is necessary, this is required, because it is absolutely essential that people be able to get into detention ponds to do maintenance, inspections, all sorts of things. It will also have an inlet, which is where the water enters from the conveyance system, like those catchment basins we showed earlier. It will have an outlet, meaning this is where water flows out. The level of the outlet may depend on if it's an overflow or if it's intended to be constantly flowing out to a treatment facility. In some cases, the detention pond is the treatment facility, and they only have the outlet to flow out in case of a really heavy storm so that the pond doesn't get overwhelmed. It has a pond bottom, and that's either wet or dry. Again, detention versus retention. It will have an emergency overflow, even if even if it has a normal outlet that is constantly letting water flow out. It will also have an additional emergency overflow that will allow it to convey more water in the event of a really heavy rain event. It also may potentially have a control structure. If it does have a control structure, this is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, about sort of what the what a control structure is and how it works. And then it will have berms dividing cells. If it's just one cell, it'll just have a berm around the entire thing. If it's two cells, a wet cell and a dry cell, or two wet cells, or however that works out, it will have berms dividing those areas because it wants to do different things at different points. So a control structure, and this is one of those things that please do not try to, catch all of this stuff. This is just an example of what a control structure looks like so you can sort of recognize one. A control structure is really there to control the outflow of water. It wants to ensure that a certain amount of water flows out if necessary, but and controls where it flows to. But it wants to make sure that those more simple systems are not overwhelmed. You do not need to know a lot about control structures, because if you have a control structure, it basically guarantees that you are not going to do the maintenance on it yourself. There's a number of reasons why that we'll talk about in the maintenance section, but recognize that if you have a control structure, you should not be messing around with it. They can be very, very dangerous, and you want a contractor to mess with it. So recognize a control structure as something that you should not go sticking your nose into. Fencing and security. Fences are generally required when there is a certain slope to ensure that people don't trip or fall in. It's also, like in this case, it's more there to make sure that like the kids don't muck around in this, and to reduce individual liability. Most places, especially developers, will go ahead and just toss a fence up around these things anyway, because it reduces their liability. It's easier than trying to sort of fuss and fuss about how this is going to work. So it's so much easier just to go ahead and toss up a chain link fence. This does have some drawbacks. A colleague of mine used to refer to these as, oh shoot, what was the word he used? Kari may remember. It was stormwater prisons. I think it was stormwater prisons, because they just look like these. They look like these incarceration facilities that are terrible and dangerous and off limits. That again, you kind of have to balance, like, do we want this thing to be completely shut off because it's dangerous, or do we want it to sort of look friendly? I can't answer that. Blanket, it's really a case by case basis, and you also generally need to talk to an engineer about that to make sure that your slopes are in a certain way, and you need to check your city and county ordinances to make sure that your fencing is compliant with that. In general, it is safer to have. In general, fences will be required because detention ponds are not playgrounds. They can be very dangerous places. And then it will include plants. My personal favorite part of them. Again, this is nothing you need to memorize. This table that you see here comes from the Snohomish County Drainage Manual, Volume 6, which was adopted was reviewed by Ecology and I believe adopted in 2020. There are a number of different types of plants which can be used. You're not going to, different than sort of typical landscaping, they're going to be organized based on the amount of inundation, that is the amount of standing water that they can generally handle. So up here at the top, we have inundation to 1 foot, meaning that these plants handle, only if they're standing water for a temporary a period of time, about a foot up. Underneath, you have 1 to 2 feet, and below that, you have 1 to 3 feet. This is not the whole table. It goes on for a little while. But I wanted you to see an example of this so you can see, oh, I should plant these higher up on a slope, or I should plant these lower down. That's if you're going to be planting, or having somebody plant in your detention pond. Primarily what you see in detention ponds are grasses. Some places do have trees and shrubs. If you are interested in doing a detention pond retrofit, which uses trees and shrubs as part of the sort of redesign, let me know. We'd be happy to talk about that. These, of course, are things you need to consider when you're doing the maintenance. A lot of places sort of just put in truck grass and call it a day. Yeah.
There is like sometimes your voice sort of fades out, like you're in an echo chamber.
Okay. No, I will speak up a little bit. That is, I apologize. That is an issue with Zoom that is apparently explicit to Zoom. It drops my voice if I start speaking too softly. I apologize. I will speak up a little bit more, and my neighbors will just have to deal with it. They get information as well.
There you go. Thanks.
So, thanks, Kari. These are obviously issues for maintenance, including the maintenance of invasive species. If you get, for instance, blackberry, you need to consider how you are going to maintain that so that it doesn't cause a problem for the function of the pond. All maintenance is basically just about the function of the pond and making sure that it's capturing water well and allowing water to discharge well. And all of the plants, all of the things that you do to it should be in service of that. So I'm going to talk really briefly about a couple other types of stormwater facility, just so that you can have some context for sort of how these are put together. like for instance, in the case of detention vaults, if you have a detention vault, this is not the webinar for you. We're not going to talk about detention vaults besides what we're talking about right now, and you have a very different maintenance road ahead of you. We are happy to have a different conversation, a separate conversation about what you need, but this is not for you. A detention vault is basically like a pond, except it's buried and it's a massive concrete vault. They are usually built under like parking lots or things, and they have a very different kind of function. The principles are the same, but the maintenance requirements are very, very different. So I mentioned earlier that there were types, that there was treatment, that detention ponds were part of treatment. This is true. They can occupy different points in the treatment chain or treatment stream, depending on kind of just how the system is designed. Very easily put, if treatment is upstream, that means that treatment occurs before it enters the pond. If treatment is downstream, that means that treatment occurs after it exits the pond. So upstream means before the pond, downstream means after the pond. Filter treatment, which can happen before or after entering the pond, is basically a large collection of these canisters or cartridges that have a medium in them that trap sediment and pollution and things like that. They are good for a certain period of time, and then they need to be dug up and the filters need to be replaced. If you have this kind or you know this kind, there's a completely different conversation to have about sort of how to maintain this system. One that should also be well known to us by now are vegetated swales or bioswales. These can also happen before or after ponds. You see this beehive, as we call it, down there in the foreground. That could be an overflow that leads to a pond, or it could be an overflow from a pond that goes into a municipal ditch system that goes elsewhere. But they're very simple systems. Basically, all they are is just swales that are graded so that water flows along them with vegetation and pervious soil to allow water to go into the groundwater or to filter as they go. I realized just a second ago that I did not pause for questions at the end of part 1, so we will pause for twice as long here at the end of part 2 before we get into maintenance to see if there are any questions so far.
There are not any questions right now, but I'm appreciating your descriptions of the upstream, downstream, detention, retention. All of that makes sense. So thank you. But yeah, no questions right now, but okay. Feel free to put them in the chat if you have one. And no one pay attention to Kari. She works with me. She has to be nice to me. I'm counting on all of you to tell me if I'm doing a terrible job. Okay, so then we're going to get into detention pond maintenance, which is sort of the main thrust of this. This is going to be a little bit more information heavy. I want to remind everyone this is not information that we expect you to retain after one sitting. This is information and resources that will be available to you after the fact. So please do not think like this is your one chance to absorb this. I am a habitual note taker, and I know that sometimes if I think I am never going to have another chance to write this down, I will dutifully write down the entire contents of each slide and completely miss what the presenter or professor is talking about. I encourage you not to do that. These slides will be available. These resources will be available. So, legal requirements. All detention ponds come with a certain level of legal requirement for the people who own it. These include potentially permitting, maintenance. They certainly include maintenance responsibility, and they certainly include safety precautions. This information that you see to your right here is from that same Snohomish County Drainage Manual. This is available at the URL that you see there. You do not have to try to remember any of this. It will be available online, and it's a very good resource.
So you want to know what you own. You want to know what conditions it's in, primarily when was the last time it was maintained and does it have any issues currently. You want to know what jurisdiction you're in. If you're listening to this, you're probably within the city of Lake Stevens. But depending on where you are in the city of Lake Stevens, you might have a little bit of history research to do, depending on was your detention pond built when it was part of the city or part of the county? When was it last maintained, and what agreements do you already have? I know that some of us are coming into a situation where we didn't know that we had this detention pond. We're trying to develop a plan for it. Chill, it's going to be okay. I promise. This is not the end of the world. We will definitely figure this out. This conservation district and the city are here to help. But these questions are sort of the central 5 questions that we're going to be looking into while we figure that stuff out. What things do you need a contractor for? I said I was going to come back to control structures, and this is the part where I make my big plea for hiring a contractor. Confined space work, meaning work that is going to take place inside a control structure, is very dangerous. And I can hear people saying like, oh, you know, I can do that. I've worked in tight spaces before. I went through my crawl space. It's really not the same. And especially working in things like sediment and everything, it can get very dangerous very quickly. If you have a control structure, or if you need to do confined space work, you gotta hire a contractor. They go through training, they understand the requirements, they have safety procedures in place. It is so much safer for you and for them if you just go ahead and reach out to a contractor. If you do that, you don't have to have them do all of the work, but you can still work on, sort of pick and choose a la mode or a la carte. You can pick and choose what you want them to have or to do in your detention pond. But confined spaces work with a control structure, you got to go with a contractor. Tall or dense vegetation removal, I strongly, again, recommend a contractor just because they have the equipment that is going to make this so much faster and so much cheaper to get through and rip through it. Anything doing on steep slopes, also recommend, again, it's just going to be so much safer and so much faster if you let them do it. Deep water is the same thing. Ponds that have not been maintained in a while, that have steep slopes or deep water, will also probably have very deep sediment. I have gotten my boots trapped in sediment, and it is a very alarming experience. I was not in any danger, but you realize that once your boot punches through that sediment and it wraps around it, it is like concrete. It is very hard to get out. And putting yourself in a position where you're trying to operate heavy machinery or do something where you could fall into that sediment puts you at real risk of drowning, even in only a couple feet of water. So I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I really strongly recommend under these circumstances getting a contractor. And then finally, if heavy equipment is needed, especially intense repairs, dredging sediment, repair of control structures, removal of heavy debris, or if you need to do any vectoring. Folks not familiar with vectoring, it is when you have a large truck that has a tank and a pipe system and pump system that is explicitly for the removal of wet sediment and soil. It's like a sump pump, but specifically it's like a massive shop vac, massive, super high-powered shop vac. You can rent vectoring equipment, but there's no guarantee that you'll know how to use it. I once again will say that a contractor will save you time and money. Rules and regulations. There are several places that you can look this stuff up. This thing you see on the right comes from the Snohomish County Code. This is specifically the code for the maintenance of constructed stormwater facilities. You're going to find this in several different places. Again, you will have help managing this. There's no need to panic. The stormwater management manual for Western Washington is a great place for just understanding how these facilities work. The county code, which you see here to your right, the Snohomish County Drainage Manual, which I've mentioned before, and then the Lake Stevens City Municipal Code is another, all places that you should look up the rules and regulations. The rules and regulations are there to clearly lay out what your responsibilities are. They are not intended to be a gotcha. They're not trying to trap you in any way. And in most cases, if you understand the regulations, you'll have a much better chance of just understanding your own responsibility and working out a beneficial agreement. Vegetation, you should be trimming and mowing, even if you just have turf grass and some other weedy grasses. You should be mowing consistently. This does a number of things, including keeping debris out of your outlets and ensuring that the pond is functioning well. You want to be taking out invasive plants. Things like blackberry will grow over into, I mean, y'all know what I'm talking about. They'll grow in thickets absolutely everywhere, and it will make the function of the pond worse. And that could lead to things like flooding, system backup, all sorts of issues. And it will make future maintenance significantly harder and more expensive. Green waste and debris, debris from vegetation, if you do have trees for any reason, or if you have anything that dies at the end of the summer, you'll end up with debris that chokes the outlets or causes issues or artificially reduces the volume of your pond. Similarly, if you're doing trimming and mowing, that green waste has got to go. It's got to come out of the pond. You can't just chop and drop and leave it where it is. If you're mowing, that stuff has to come out. If you're doing weed whacking, that stuff has to come out. The control structure. This is largely just to once again push that like control structures are complicated pieces of equipment. This is all stuff that needs to be maintained on a control structure. The manhole lid, the manhole structure needs to make sure that there's no warping or gaps, orifices or notches, weirs in order to control flow. Gate valves and the gate handle. This is the thing that determines, okay, it's time to let this out. We need to do this in a controlled way. The ladder is basically a series of metal rungs sunk into concrete. The bottom orifice, the overflow, and then of course, if there's any sediment and debris in the bottom, that has to be pulled out to make sure that it has its total volume and functions well. These are complicated things, and I strongly recommend getting a contractor. Trash and debris. Debris doesn't always just come from plants. Sometimes people toss stuff in there, or sometimes very normal trash gets into the conveyance system, ends up popping in and becomes a problem. Reducing your debris, I know here that choosing your species, very important. It's part of figuring out what plants you want to have in it. This stuff will all clog pipes and will mean that, like I said earlier, there's more chance of failure, there's more chance of flooding and backup. Similarly, sediment and erosion. If you have not maintained the sidewalls or the berms and water is flowing in and it's taking soil with it, or large amount of sediment is coming in and not being maintained, the bottom will slowly fill up and it will reduce the capacity of your pond. And then eventually, even for very moderate rain events, they'll back up and you'll have flooding. So you need to be also making sure that everything that should get out of these systems gets out. Failed systems, since we're continuing on trying to scare everybody, can cause flooding if the system backs up. It can cause pollution if there's nothing in there to stop the pollution, or if they're not functioning in a way that allows that hinders the discharge of pollution. You could have an issue downstream. Over vegetation, this one happens often. It's usually an invasive species, but it also happens a lot with cattail, which is not an invasive species that's native here, but they can still cause real problems. Sedimentation, loss of volume. We have this diagram here to the right. You can see sediment is kind of building up on the bottom of this pond. As it continues to build and continues to build, the volume of the pond will actually decrease. Slope failure, this is part of erosion like I was talking about. No ponding, similarly sedimentation. This also means that if things continue to fill in, basically you won't have the capacity to store water anymore. And short circuiting is basically where the pond doesn't allow for water to be retained, so it moves through extremely quickly, and then the pond isn't fulfilling its function. So inspection, so I hopefully, now that I've scared everybody with how bad this stuff can get, that will impress upon folks that inspection, reporting, and documentation are very important. Contact the city. You've taken the first step by showing up here. That's great. Talk to John, talk to Shannon, and just kind of, get into the flow of when they're going to come out, what you need to do, all that kind of stuff. Maintain a schedule. Maintain a schedule for inspection with the city. Maintain a schedule with your HOA, maintain a schedule with maintenance contractors or whoever's going to be doing the maintenance. Just once you get into a routine, it makes things significantly easier. Keep notes, keep good notes just of when stuff is done. If maintenance contractor comes out and says, oh, we did all this stuff, but next time we might need to do this, keep a note of that, and that will help you remember, like, oh, next time we'll have a little bit more expense because we'll need to do this. Or if we do this, then next time we won't have to do this, so on and so forth. Take photos. Take photos often of, it in different states. Take photos after a heavy rain event to sort of see how it works. Take photos in the middle of the summer. Take photos in different conditions. Take photos when there is a problem, when there isn't a problem, and, just stick them into a big share folder with everyone that, other folks on the HOA committee or apartment building committee can access and sort of use for different things. And then keep existing reports and plans. As these things were built, they had to have an as-built report. They had to have a plan when they were put in. You can hold on to maintenance reports. Just keep all of that stuff, and it'll help you down the road. So talking about budgeting, and I'm going to move through this part relatively quickly. Typical costs for wet ponds are between about $17.50 to $35 per cubic meter, which comes out to about 50 cents per dollar per cubic foot. For dry ponds, it's about $10 per square meter, or 30 cents per cubic foot, or about $5 per square meter for larger ponds, 15 cents per cubic foot. It matters how large the pond is, basically, especially for dry ponds. So I say that, and you say, okay, but I don't know how large my pond is. Well, there's a lot of ways you can find out how big it is. As built or county records or city records, depending on when it was built. Previous maintenance reports all should note this is the size of the pond, and it will note both in terms of surface area and in terms of cubic feet storage. If you cannot come up with that, if you do not have those things, you can't find them, whatever, go to Google Maps, draw a shape around the pond, and you can click on the little polygon that you made, and it will tell you the area. I did this one of the North Cove Park just south of City Hall about 10 minutes before we got on this meeting. And I just went and drew a little circle around it. And it looks like that, the green space of that is a little over an acre or about just shy of 1,000 square feet. So Google Maps is your friend if you can't find the other information. Budgeting around routine maintenance. Routine maintenance can be estimated at 3 to 5% of the construction cost annually. So this is, the cost to come in and do the mowing or cost to do whatever else. So depending, if you know what the construction cost was, you can get a good estimate. Mowing can be around around about $400 per visit. That's, just to come in and do that. You do it twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. If you put that off, intensive maintenance can be upwards of $1,000 annually. That is massive blackberry removal. That is, we need to haul out a ton of cattails. That is a lot of other stuff. So to sum it up at the end, good planting and regular maintenance can reduce your costs. So non-routine maintenance and repairs Sediment is very expensive to remove, about $50 to $100 per cubic yard, including dredging and disposal. And mobilization can be around $4,000. So that's in mobilization, meaning at a start, you're going to drop about $4,000 just to get them out there on top of what they're going to charge per cubic foot. Repairing structures is highly variable. It depends on the kind of damage and what needs to be done, and will require a quote. I don't have a ballpark for you there. And repairing and dredging may require additional permits. None of us want to do additional permits. So do regular maintenance, make sure that everything is good in working order, and you can keep these costs down. Hiring a contractor. So you may need to hire different contractors for different jobs. For instance, somebody may have Vector experience, but they don't have close confined spaces experience. You may be able to hire a general landscaper who's able to do the mowing, but they're not going to repair your control structures. You need to make sure that everybody is licensed and insured. You want to check their previous experiences. You always want to get 3 quotes. And if possible, you want to check their previous references. I hear everybody kind of going, oh man, I don't want to do all of that. That's terrible. If only there was some kind of alphabetized list put together by the county, maybe updated in the end of February of this year, to tell me all of the contractors operating in Western Washington that may be equipped to maintain storm drainage facilities. Boy, do I have great news for you. That little excerpt at the bottom is the preface to a document that is available at the URL at the bottom of this slide called Storm Drainage Facility Cleaning Contractors. And they are basically a clearinghouse of folks for you to peruse and potentially contact. Here are some budgeting resources. Again, don't try to furiously write these down. The majority of these are either documents or calculators to help you determine how much something is going to cost. Finally, I want to talk about working with a municipality, which is a big part of what we're doing here. I've given this talk a few times, and this is the first time that I've been able to just put names at the bottom of things. So for instance, identify your inspector. It's John Stevens. He's on this call. He's a very nice guy. He and I have done rain barrel events together. He's great. You can have a whole conversation with him about what's going to be what is part and parcel for an inspection and what he needs from you. Keep things simple. Keep good records. You don't have to have complete knowledge around this. You just need enough to make it work. Keep good records. Just write everything down. Scan them, put them in a digital file or in a safe or something so that you can hold on to these records. And delightful. We painted rain barrels together. Gosh, 2 years ago was it? You have a good list of people to work with at the city. These are also some resources. This image on the right is taken from that same drainage manual, and this is just a bunch of technical resources. In addition to that, you have city and county records. You have city and county GSI maps or GIS maps. Scopy is the one that will most apply to you. You should have drainage reports and drainage plans. You have that same stormwater management manual. You should have a maintenance agreement somewhere. You have auditor inspector files. You have Google Maps to look stuff up. And I want to say if all else fails, but honestly, even if we are the first person you contact, you have the Snohomish Conservation District. We will help you with this. So thank you very much to Lake Stevens. I will wrap up here. I did not expect that to take that long. I obviously got off on a little bit of a tangent. I am happy to answer questions if we have them in the last 10 minutes.
Well, I will answer the question of when will you get these resources that David provided. I will send out by Friday the slideshow and then a list of the links, so it'll be easier to go find all this stuff that he talked about. And then same thing, the video recording will be posted by Friday, and so you'll be able to go back and watch the sections that maybe you missed or wanted to catch up on or something like that. So check your email box by then, or the I Love Lake page or the city page, probably in their wrap up, I would guess next week, just based on timing. But yeah, so if there's any questions, I'm not seeing any right now. Checking all the sources. No.
Well, if you think of questions, or you are working through the notes and have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are happy to help with this. We know that it can be a little bit complicated, and we know it can be a little bit intimidating. I hope that we kind of took the edge off today, and we're really appreciative of you coming out and joining us for this talk and kind of engaging in this process, because I know that it can be a little bit challenging sometimes to even sort of know where to get started. The Conservation District specializes in knowing where to get started. So please, yeah, reach out to us and let us know how we can help. And we did just get one. Oh, that was from Kari. Okay. So wait.
I thought I put a couple of the links in there. One just was that the contractor list that David just mentioned. That's the first one. And then the second one is the City of Lake Stevens or ilovelake.org page. And from there, you can get to the contact information for Shannon and John and David and myself and everybody involved. Learn more about the Cascade Award, the other events coming up. That'll all be on that Lake Stevens page. So make sure you have that too. All right, one more sweep here on questions, if I'm seeing any. And I'm not. So I think we are good. John pops on though. So did you want to say something, John?
No, I just thank you all for doing this for us. And like David and Kari are both saying, give me a call. I'll be out there as soon as I can put it in the schedule, and normally that's within 1 to 2 days. I can get out there and help anybody out. So thanks again. Thanks, David and Kari.
You're welcome. Thanks, John. Yeah, reach out to him, reach out to us if you have any questions at all.
Thanks so much for having us.
All right. And with that, I will close the webinar, and everybody go out and enjoy the sunshine in the summer. We'll see you again soon. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.